back with Tom Werman, the great producer. How are you, Tom?
I'm well. How are you, Jay?
Doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I must tell you off the bat that I have probably spent thousands of hours of my life listening to music that you had something to do with, and I greatly thank you for that.
Oh, you're entirely welcome.
I know I'm not alone. When we mention TED Nugent, Cheap Trick, Motley Crew, Boston, Reo Speedwagon, and all that, it's soundtrack to many of our lives.
All right. Well, that's great. I enjoyed doing it so much that I often wondered why I was getting paid.
I know, as a teenager, you probably thought, wow, I can actually get paid for hanging out with the bands and telling people what's good. It's rather logical. I think the first record I probably heard of yours was the Reo Speedwagon Riding the Storm Out. Was that their first record that you were involved?
No. I signed them after I heard their very first record. I never produced them.
Okay.
Yeah, and their very first record was done 8-track and in somebody's home studio in Connecticut. And the songs I liked were Sophisticated Lady and 157 Riverside Avenue. But Riding the Storm Out came, I don't know how much later.
Okay. Yeah, that must have been about 74, 70, somewhere around there. Now, how did Kevin Cronin join the band? Did you have anything to do with that, or what was the story when he stepped in?
No, I had nothing to do with them after I signed them.
Okay.
Because I was, as an A&R man, you'd sign bands. That was just before. Well, it was like a couple of months after I joined Epic Records.
Sure.
So that was the first band I signed, and then I would not be allowed to sign another band for another 5 years.
Wow.
I was pretty desperate by the time I got around to TED Nugent.
Now, tell us a little bit about, because I know it's an interesting story how you came to join Epic Records. You actually graduated college with a business degree and had, I guess, written a letter to Clive Davis, kind of pouring your heart out of why you should be a part of the team?
Right. I had an MBA, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had an MBA from Columbia Business School, and, I kind of... It looked good to me, advertising on Madison Avenue. I turned down a job offer with Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, and I really didn't know what I was doing. We're way too young at that point to make life decisions. So I went to this job, and I became suicidal because it just was terrible.
You hated every day.
Well, I came to hate every day. One of the interesting things that catapulted me right out of there was I was a first-year guy. I was in the Procter & Gamble account group working on Jif peanut butter and Gain detergent. And the new guys had inner offices, inside offices, and they had no windows. So everything was painted corporate white, and you had corporate-approved art on the wall. One weekend I came in, I don't know what possessed me, but I came in with pastel blue and pastel yellow paints, and I painted my office very subtle. So on Monday, the group head came in. He did a double take. He came back after he walked by my office, and he looked in and he said, "Very nice, it's very nice," and he walked on. And the following Monday, my office was white, and it freaked me out.
Oh man!
There wasn't a
Big Brother was watching.
Yeah, there wasn't a word. So, at that point, I wrote to Clive and I started interviewing, and because I was a musician and I loved rock and roll, but I also had a job and an MBA, and that helps. If you write a letter to a guy and ask for a job as an unemployed person, I think it's much more difficult than if you say, "I'm in a very nice position, I don't like it."
Sure.
So
obviously you started off at the bottom of the totem pole. You have an MBA. Your family might have thought you were crazy at that point, that you were going to go
Oh, my
essentially
mother
start
wept.
at the mailroom
Yeah,
at
well,
Epic.
they thought I was throwing my life away, and it was a leap of faith.
Sure. Well, tell us about the Ted Nugent project, that whole story, because I grew up all over the country myself. I was a guitar player myself from a very early age. I'm in my mid 50s, so I in Dayton, Ohio, I remember being close enough to Michigan,
Yeah.
the guitar battle, and I spoke to Mike Panera about it recently,
Oh,
where it's Ted Nugent versus Mike Panera, and they came to town, and it's the big guitar duel. So he'd obviously had been doing the Amboy Dukes around Detroit,
yeah,
Michigan for a while, and
yeah.
was a raging guitar, god. But what was it about Ted that you felt you could capture the songs, and this was something that FM radio could get on?
Yeah.
Because Journey to the Center of the Mind that had been out for years. I mean, Ted wasn't exactly getting a lot of radio airplay on
No,
those
no.
Zappa records.
Well, he was, he was just going solo.
Okay.
So the Amboy Dukes had broken up, and he was now Ted Nugent. And when I was told by the guy who had his production contract and who was managing him at the time, uh, in other words, handling his whole career, really, he came into my office and said, Ted Nugent's available. And I was underwhelmed by this news. I mean, he didn't mean much to me at the time. So,
Right.
um, I went out to Chicago to see LaBelle because we had just signed LaBelle,
Sure.
and it
The
was
great Patti LaBelle.
yeah, and it was an interesting. The A&R people were supposed to be pretty familiar with everything that was on our roster. So the A&R department went out to Chicago, and there were meetings there of some kind, and so there was a reason for us to be there. And this guy, the manager, um, set up a gig at Illinois Institute of Technology, and it was there may have been 200 people there
Hmm.
in the audience, and Ted came out and he was on 12, and he just went stayed on 12 for like an hour, and I was really bowled over by the guy. I mean, his energy and what appealed to me especially was the rhythm guitar parts, the licks.
Yeah.
They're very like
It wasn't just one long solo.
right. The licks that Keith Richards came up with the greatest guitar licks, the guitar riffs. I think in recorded music history. And Ted, would occasionally come, look at Cat Scratch Fever. I mean, it's like the classic guitar thing.
Yeah, epic riffs.
Guitar riff that every guitarist I ever worked with in the studio played to me through the glass just as a joke, and I said, okay, yeah, right, we've got that out of the way. But Ted, I enjoyed his hard charging locomotive approach to rock and roll, and so I went backstage afterwards, and we hit it off right away, and I communicated to him that I understood kind of what he was trying to do.
Now, was he singing lead vocals, or was Derek St. Holmes in the band at that point?
Jeez, I can barely remember, but I think Derek was there.
Okay.
Yeah, and because Derek was in the studio, so I went in. I started dropping into the studio a lot because I didn't realize that this guy Lou Futterman, who's a nice fellow, would be producing the record. I mean, I wanted Pete Townsend to produce the record.
Sure.
And I spoke to his lawyer about that, actually, on the plane coming back from Chicago. And for many reasons, that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
But then when it was explained to me that it was a production deal and that this guy had to be the producer, I got nervous. and I kept going over to the studio and making suggestions and kind of horning in. And he was nice enough to give me co-production credit. I was co-producer with him. So, bang, the album sold 1 million records out of the box, and and I was a producer.
So this was your first production role? I mean, as a musician, had you been kind of savvy around your studio coming up? What was your studio experience prior to that?
I had no studio experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just, being a music lover, you had this vision in mind of what TED needed to be recorded like.
Well, right, yeah. Listen, Jay, this guy, my furnace broke, and I'm having a new furnace put in.
Need to pause?
And this guy just showed up. Can we pause?
Yes. You want to ring me back?
Just for 1 minute.
No problem. Media.
Okay, we got.
All right, back in track. I know that furnace is important this time of year out there.
Jeez, telling you, man.
Wow.
So let me, before we resume, I know you have a lot of publications and broadcasts and.
Yeah.
What would this be?
Well, our main one is INDIEPOWER TV, and that's where I do the interviews with the artists and the producers. Now, I take audio from this and put it on our radio show, which is Indie 100. So those are the main ones. And then I write for L2P, which is Live to Play. It's one of the #1 musician sites in the business. So, but the main one where this interview will go start to finish will be INDIEPOWER TV, and I'll bring in graphics of all the artists and yourself during the talk.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be real great. So, again, if you want to pick up, we're talking about making that first Ted Nugent album. You basically co-producing. We were talking about
right.
Your desire, or you selling the label on the fact, even though you've never produced a record in your life, you wanted to kind of at least co-produce this.
Right. And then, are we starting now?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. So the record was very successful, and the record industry, they're not very cautious. If there's a big success, then they kind of go nuts over it, and you don't have to really prove yourself. All you have to do is do something once, and then that's it. They
want more of that.
Yeah, they want more of it, exactly. And unfortunately, I mean, it was great for me, but unfortunately, I was put solidly in a box and never really allowed to escape that box. I was in the hard rock, pop rock box, and I would have been really happy to do bands like the Eagles along the way, but not that they needed a producer. But people just said no. This is what you do, not that.
Right. They wanted you to be a specialist.
That's right. And I was, in a way, because I had to keep doing bands. Some of them who were marginally talented, I became good at getting bands on the radio. I made hit singles with bands that normally would not have had hit singles in the 70s and 80s, AM versus FM. So,
sure.
I had FM bands, and if you made an AM hit single, then you could sell a couple of million extra albums.
Well, obviously, making that first Ted Nugent album, I mean, you had landmark songs like Stranglehold and Stormtroop and Just What the Doctor Ordered, but you got the airplay on Hey Baby, which was obviously more of Derek's song.
Right, it was Derek's song.
Yeah, so talk about that dichotomy where Ted's on 12, he's stormtrooping, jumping off the amps, flaming arrows, but it's Derek's song getting the airplay. What did that start to cause, within the group? Because the airplay was everything. Because the label, that's the biggest selling point they had, is getting on a FM radio.
It really wasn't troublesome because, Ted had a lot to do with every song, whether he wrote it or not.
Yeah.
Arrangements and guitar all over it. And he was the lead guitarist. Derek was the rhythm guitarist, and it was true on that song. Too. The only difference between that song and many of the other songs was the vocalist.
Right.
Ted continued to want to sing more and more songs with every album. So.
Now, transferring that to the Free for All album, because I know there's a few songs that Meatloaf sang. How did Meatloaf come into the equation when obviously Derek was the lead singer? He had hits on the radio.
Derek was, I don't know, I don't remember exactly what it was he did, but he was arrested. And so I think he spent at least one night in jail. And Lou, the guy, that guy who owned the production contract and who was the co-producer, he had it with Derek. He and Derek didn't get along so well. So he said, I'm going to teach him a lesson. We're going to replace him, at least temporarily. So who can we get? And I said, well, I know Meatloaf. I know this guy Meatloaf. He's not exactly what the doctor ordered.
Right.
He's not exactly appropriate for this, but he does have a hell of a voice. And so he got on the plane the next day. He came down, and we used him on 3 or 4 songs. And then Derek came back.
Okay.
That was it.
So that album was obviously a combination of the two vocalists, but Ted being up front, being the main writer, being the guitar hero.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that album didn't seem to be the big breakthrough. Obviously, it continued the buzz, but Cat Scratch Fever obviously was the big breakthrough, the giant radio hit off the bat. Talk about how the band evolved at that point, and how you as a producer became more and more involved or more confident with your abilities to guide a hit record.
Well, yeah, I went from basically quality control on the first album to, I worked more closely with Ted on parts, and I think I got better and better performances out of him. Although there was really less for me to do with Ted Nugent than there was with any other artist that I ever produced, because Ted knew every note of every instrument.
It was all written, all rehearsed, all road ready.
In his brain, yeah. He would just tell people, no, play this, not that,
He wasn't looking for a lot of outside direction.
He was not looking for a lot of outside direction, but he welcomed my input. He did not welcome Lou's input quite as much. Mm-hmm. Lou was really, he thought of himself as a vocal specialist. So, and I was into the tracks, the music, all the time.
So when he came and played you the Cat Scratch Fever riff, do you remember hearing the songs for that album? And
well, I heard it live first.
Yeah.
He played
he started introducing the new songs
in Atlanta, and I said, I called my boss and I said, Ted's written a single. We have a single, and it was, by golly, it was a big single.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And on each album, you felt stronger as far as the studio capabilities that you were building.
Yeah. We didn't have very many options in those days. We had just gone to 16-track, and the outboard gear we had, the things that we could use to affect the sound were very few. So. The first song I ever mixed or sat in on the mix for was Stranglehold learned a lot by mixing that song.
Mm-hmm.
I picked up a lot of information on the way. By the time I had done Ted's second record, I think I had signed Cheap Trick, and I was doing their second record, but that was by myself. I was the only producer on that record. So, by then I kind of knew what I was doing.
Obviously, a very fertile time. I mean, Ted Nugent's music struck a chord. FM radio loved him, and he became a headliner in the arenas and the big stadium shows. I remember seeing him on several stadium shows, like the California World Music Festival out here in L.A. And he was just built for the California Jam and all the big, gigantic shows.
Yeah.
Now,
it was fun.
Now in Cheap Trick, obviously Jack Douglas produced the first album. Talk about the development of you getting more involved in producing the band, and I mean ultimately what you saw in the band initially, because obviously the first album, which was much more raw, and you know, obviously they were still defining, you know, their full personalities, you know, on record and on stage. Tell us about the development of Cheap Trick.
Well, they were pretty explosive on stage, very hard and loud, and I wanted to get them on the radio, and I wanted to make singles so that they could get people's attention, and that's the way I worked with most groups. You know, just get them on the radio and establish them, and then if they want to do experimental things, that would be fine. They always fancied themselves as a much harder rock and roll band than the way they came off on my records. So, I stepped in when Jack was too busy with Aerosmith to make time for Cheap Trick at that moment, and they kind of let me do whatever I thought was right. So we had, I guess we didn't have a real hit till Surrender. But
right, obviously, In Color were great songs, but yeah, it wasn't until the live version of the song "You Want Me"
right.
really took off. So,
well, Budokan was huge, and we had just done Dream Police in 30 days, and it was hurry, and then they put it on the shelf for 8 months.
But obviously, great songs they still play today. Hello There, Big Eyes. You know, I mean the whole.
There's some good ones.
Yeah, Southern Girls. You know, the whole thing. Now, obviously, talk about the development of going into Heaven Tonight and how the sound and the songs, you know, became more solid at that point.
Well, the sound, for me, the sound did. I mean, we got a little harder. We had figured out how to, you know, mic certain things, like Tom's bass, how to get the most out of those amps that he used, and I don't know, everything was a little better and a little better sounding, and I like the songs better, I think, on Heaven Tonight.
Yeah.
Dream Police their songwriting was incredible. In fact, the whole band was incredible, and I was really surprised and disappointed that they weren't huge. They were just big, you know.
Yeah, no question. I mean, you know, from In Color on, I thought they were easily one of the top bands. I always found it strange that I Want You to Want Me became a signature song, because I never felt that was the best that Cheap Trick had. They were much harder rocking than that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, for me, I guess one of my favorites is Auf Wiedersehen.
Oh yeah.
And because it's hard, for that time it was very hard. It was punkish.
Yeah.
And
Robin is screaming on that song by the end.
Yeah. And things like Gonna Raise Hell.
Yeah.
And
Edition.
There are some serious long, major musical pieces that Rick wrote.
Talk about the creative process of working with him. You say Ted came in, everything was already pre-designed and all that. How was Cheap Trick as far as, developing anything in the studio, or were the songs pretty much all there and they were just working on arrangements?
Some of the songs were there, nowhere near as locked down as Ted's songs would be. Sometimes Rick would bring in a chorus and a different verse. We'd use the verse from one song and the chorus from another song. And there was a lot of refining and sometimes writing in the studio. Very creative process. Those were lightning fast sessions. They were just great. The most enjoyable I ever had. And there was a lot of laughing, and these guys were good. I mean, they were really good at their instruments, the best. And it was just a treat to work with them, because you'd think, well, this is going to take a while, and bang, there it was. It would just happen.
Yeah.
And with everything, Bunny would do all the basic tracks in 2 days. And then he literally hung a sign on his snare that said "Gone Fishing."
Right.
And he would go home. He'd go back to Rockford. That was his whole thing.
Wow.
And each one of them was really great. And
now, I know you said at that point you were pretty much living in the record plant here in L.A. That's where a lot of that stuff was cut.
Studio B record plant.
Wow.
3rd Street, the best.
Amazing.
It was my home away from home. I did 16 albums in that one room.
Well, I know you said the band wanted to be the Beatles, but you kind of heard them as the Who. You had the pretty boy Roger Daltrey as singer. You had the slashing windmill guitarist, like a Townsend type, and Tom Peterson being the John Entwistle. But they obviously, loved the Beatles. Talk about that kind of dichotomy of
it's
finding a middle ground.
It's strange because later on there was some disagreement with which way they went and who was responsible for that. In fact, I should have wanted them to be the Beatles, and they should have wanted to be the Who, because Rick's comments were all about how they weren't hard enough. The records weren't hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
But, we didn't do a lot of, I don't really think we were very Beatlesque. There were a couple of things, but really Rick's main influence was Electric Light Orchestra.
Yeah, the Jeff Lynne type stuff, and of course California Man and all that.
Right. And I knew very little of it, which I think was healthy. Was good for the
sure. When you start to get into a song like Heaven Tonight, you start to hear a little of the Sgt. Pepper type, more adventuresome, track.
Yeah, we experimented with stuff too, with sound and with mics and with placement, and it was good. But
well, obviously, it really started happening for them at that point with Surrender. Talk about developing, the Dream Police album. What was the feeling going in? Again, were the songs together? Was it more work?
They had to come up with a lot of songs in a big hurry. That's the problem with success in rock and roll. You might spend 5 years writing the material for your first album.
Yeah.
You finally get signed, and you've been working on these songs for years and years and years. And then if it's a hit, then you have to come up with the same number of songs in the next 6 months while you're on the road.
Yeah.
So that's the way it was back then. And they gave us a deadline for Dream Police because they had a tour. And they were a band that lived on the road. They were touring constantly and probably still through that album in a big hurry, and it was great. But then unfortunately, it just sat there and waited while they sold millions and millions of Budokans.
Right.
That was it. But it was good. I mean,
well, I know Budokan was never even intended for U.S. release. It was a Japanese recording, and just somehow was forced because of the import sales.
Yeah, I think that's true. I was called in Florida. I was down there doing my last album with Ted, the 5th album I did with him, called Weekend Warriors.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't love the record, but I did want to finish it. And my boss called me and said, I want you to go to Tokyo and produce this live recording we're going to do. And I said, well, geez, I'd love to, but I have to finish with Ted. So I missed out on that one. It was too bad. Would have been fun.
Sure. Well, obviously they had a great run, and again, these bands are still happening today. Cheap Trick, like you say, they're still out there grinding it out, and such an influence. We want to talk a little bit about working with Motley Crue next, and obviously when I heard the first Motley Crue, the first Too Fast for Love, the indie record, to me it reminded me a cross between Sweet, the Ballroom Blitz era, and Cheap Trick. You could tell that Vince and even Nicky, they had a flair for what Rick and Robin were doing. And obviously, when you worked with Poison, you could tell they were obviously Cheap Trick fans. So, Cheap Trick is one of those bands that is more endearing than they ever got the total accolades. Obviously, they've been extremely successful, but not as big as they should have been.
Well, musicians love them.
Yeah,
they really do, and there was probably a lot of influence. I hear a lot of Bunny's influence on drummers.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of drummers. Just his licks, and he was so great for what he didn't play as well as for what he did play.
Yeah.
But he had a style that was all his own, possibly influenced a little bit by Ringo, but it was pretty much his own style, and I still hear to this day. I hear his licks, and I hear his patterns. And
sure,
it's great.
Now, working with Motley Crue, had you moved over to? Were you actually working for Elektra at that point?
Yeah, I was head of A&R for Elektra.
Okay. So through your success at Epic, something opened up at Elektra where it seemed like a fresh start and a new opportunity to kind of get some new blood.
Well, right, and I had asked CBS for a raise in my basic salary because I was making royalties, but I was also, I had an office, a secretary, and I was still in the A&R department, and they didn't want to give me a raise, and I said, well, I mean, come on, I didn't say this, but I figured I'm worth 3 times what they're paying me,
right.
With considering what I've signed here, I mean, I signed bands to CBS that sold, they probably sold 125 million albums, and I never got paid a penny for signing anything.
Right.
So I said, are you people really willing to let me go, for like $50,000, which is what I was asking for, more.
Sure.
and the answer apparently was yes. Dick Asher didn't want to give me a raise. He didn't even negotiate. He didn't even say, well,
there was no middle ground. There was no upping of anything.
Yeah, so I said, well, screw you guys. I'm out of here. So I left and I went over to Elektra, and then Bob Krasnow replaced Joe Smith as the president of Elektra.
Yeah.
And I loved Joe, and Bob and I didn't get along at all. the first thing he wanted to do was drop Motley Crue when he got to the label. And I said, with all due respect, Bob, somebody's got to pay the bills around here. And, this is meat and potatoes. That's my business is meat and potatoes. You can sign Chaka Khan and all that. He was a jazz, blues, R&B guy at one point.
Right.
And he wanted to be head of A&R. So I told him I can't do this. And I'm, so I went independent, and they said, "Would you do 3 records for us as a production deal?" And I said, "Yeah." We worked it out, and then Motley Crue was the first record.
So they had already remixed and put out the Too Fast for Love album,
Yeah.
and then they were obviously working on Shout at the Devil. Obviously, to a lot of people.
They weren't working on that yet.
Oh, they hadn't come up with it yet, but that was the next one up.
Yep, that was the first I did with them.
Now, were they forced to work with you through the label, or did they automatically warm up with your Cheap Trick and Nugent and all your track record? How was the marriage coming together and working with them?
It was tentative. Tommy was the most accepting. Nicky was the most suspicious. And he was always like that. Nicky was not an establishment kind of guy, and I don't blame him. So,
right. They wanted to be
themselves.
He had a vision.
Yeah, we had a meeting, and then we went into a rehearsal studio and worked things out, and that was we went on from there.
Sure. Well, obviously they weren't faking it. They were from the streets, partying extremely hard, probably the hardest partying band out there.
Yep.
And
at the time.
Yeah. I mean, coming up with that album, a lot of people still consider Shout at the Devil one of the best ever of the Motley Crue catalog. And of course, this coming month here is the final month of the final Motley Crue tour to come full circle back to LA. It's a pretty amazing run they had.
Well, yeah, Nicky called me about 6 months ago, and I hadn't talked to him in 15 years, and at least, actually. And so we talked, and I said I'd really love to come and see the band, at the Garden in whenever they were there. And I said if I could get really great seats and come back and see you guys, it would be a nice thing. And he said, "Well, sure, that's no problem. I know the bass player." And that was it. That was all. I said I can't. I don't want to call your manager because we had a thing way back when. And he said, "No, that's okay. I'll handle it." And I never heard from him again. I mean, that was just it. So, I won't see them. I did see them once, about, I would say, 8 years ago, up here at Saratoga Performing Arts Center, and they were still really good. But that's it, huh? Next month, where do they finish? L.A.?
Yeah, Staples Center, three sold-out nights, ending with New Year's Eve. So you can only imagine the exhilaration of Home Sweet Home at the end of the last show in their hometown.
Yeah. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, quite a special one. Now, talk about making that record, because obviously I was one of those that felt that their original raw, cheap recording of Too Fast for Love was better than the polished and remixed Roy Thomas Baker version. It's like you can't add more attitude than they had. They had it. It wasn't a great production, but some of our favorite records were raw.
Right.
But to step up the production, talk about making Shout at the Devil, and what are your greatest memories of them stepping up?
It was tough. We had a very divisive, deceitful engineer who I had to fire a couple of albums later. But the band was still, they weren't great as far as I was concerned. I thought Mick was really good and Tommy was really good. I thought Vince was okay as a singer. A lot of attitude, not a lot of pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicky was okay as a bass player. He got much better as time went by. So he also had just slammed his car into a utility pole on Coldwater Canyon and broken his shoulder. So it was hard to play the bass with a broken shoulder.
Yeah.
He had his arm in a sling, and so it took us quite a while to get to get going with that record. But then when after we had the basic tracks down, Mick worked pretty quickly, and it turned out it was actually, to my ears, a little too dirty. But everybody loves the sound of that, and they love the sound of that. The way I like to hear Motley Crue was girls, girls, girls.
Yeah.
That sound. I mean, you could actually. It wasn't sludgy. It was bright and edgy.
Sure. But Mick Mars was the riff monster. Mick had all the great riffs. Not quite the Ted Nugent level, but he came in there with the great riffs.
Yeah, very underappreciated guitar player.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in between Shot the Devil and Girls, 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 heroin and a lot of problems came into the band. I mean, obviously, It's well documented that Nicky and Tommy were on, Pluto at that point. So how did you deal with the Theater of Pain album?
Theater of Pain was tough. I didn't think the material was quite as good because they were distracted, on the road, had to get in the studio and then out back onto the road. They were just like Cheap Trick in terms of road, and they'd have monster tours.
Yeah.
And their personal habits didn't help. It's bad enough being on the road by itself, but when partying every night and being on the road, it was really tough. I went out with them a couple of times to see what it was like, and it was, just as people say it is.
A long line of drug dealers and groupies, I'm sure.
Yeah, and so there were distractions and there were drugs during that record, and you put the pressure, the time pressure, the not quite up to snuff a couple of the songs, and then the pressure of getting in and out of the studio. Nothing was really good for that album.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, obviously, the breakout was the Brownsville Station song. Talk about whose decision it was to redo "Smokin' in the Boys' Room."
I don't really remember whose decision it was. I did the last Brownsville album, but I can't remember whether it was before that or after that. I think it was after that.
Yeah, it was definitely after that. I remember that Brownsville album.
Wasn't Home Sweet Home on
Yeah, Home Sweet Home was the one after that. And, talk about that one, because obviously that's their big show ender now, well, Tommy on the piano.
Yeah, it was, he played it on the piano. We decided to do it. It was great. And then I kind of gave it the what I call the kitchen sink treatment, which was my approach to power ballads. I did some great power ballads.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a good way to get bands like Motley Crue on the radio.
Sure. MTV was obviously a big force at this point, and
yeah.
it was made. They wanted the big power ballad and get that female demographic.
Right, that's right. And man, it was great. They were pretty serious in the studio. They would work hard. They took their music seriously, but they also took their fun seriously.
Right. So at that point, they were probably the well was a little dry as far as really strong song ideas.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah.
But that led into Girls, Girls, Girls. Obviously, they're still partying, but that album is much stronger. Did they somewhat start to get some of their habits under control, or what changed at that point?
I think they were cleaning up, and I think they were they were clean, and Mick had finally scored a really good guitar tech, and I think that made a big difference. That was the way I wanted his guitar to sound, the way it sounds on Girls, Girls, Girls.
Yeah.
I also loved Wild Side. That was a nice experimental album with samples, drum samples, and electronic drums, and just a long and great song.
So was Tommy bringing some of those ideas as far as experimentation and rhythms and different drums?
Yeah, he was very, very into tech and the latest thing.
Okay, so he was into club music and all that big booming club stuff.
Yeah, he liked triggers.
Yeah.
So that was good. It just worked, that album, and of course, Girls, 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 the song was all they needed.
Sure.
Really.
Obviously the video is like a travelogue of Hollywood here with the Seventh Veil, and of course, right. I know where the strip club was where they filmed most of it over there by Western and Sunset, which is no longer a club, but I forget what they.
Yeah, I was supposed to be the sleazy club owner, and so I was in the video, but then I wound up on the cutting room floor.
Wow, amazing stuff. Well, those three bands alone, Ted Nugent, Cheap Trick, and Motley Crue, were undeniable, successes that'll last a lifetime. But I know there were records you made in this time that should have been hits, and of course, Twisted Sister, and of course, we're not going to take it as in the news with the Donald Trump, use of that song. What do you think of allowing Mr. Trump to use that as a theme song?
Well, I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised that he'd be a Trump supporter. He's a very disappointing character. So's Trump. So I think they probably belong together. I don't know if there's a licensing agreement or not, but I have very little that's positive to say about Dee Snider, who is a sad guy. He's an unfortunate guy.
Yeah, his recent attack on Paul Stanley, I thought, was completely unnecessary. I mean, love or hate Kiss. I mean, the fact that Gene and Paul have continued to survive and succeed after this many years is.
What did he say?
He basically just blasted Paul. I forget all the verbiage he threw out there, but a lot of people jump on Kiss for having replacements for Ace and Peter, and obviously it's 40 years since they had that chemistry or that magic, so they want Kiss to continue, but a lot of the fans want it to be 1975 again, and it's not.
Yeah, well, what band doesn't have replacements?
Right. Yeah, very, very few.
Not one that I know of.
Yeah, maybe U2, maybe a couple, but
okay,
not many. But
right.
No, he blasted them, and then Paul came out and called him, like a wannabe, or he called his band Bozos, is what he referred to with Twisted Sister.
The band guys are okay. Yeah, they're good guys.
Yeah.
I really. I liked them. I had a great time working with them, and then when it was over, it was like the most amazing charade I've ever seen from a person who who became the ultimate backstabber. I mean, he was just the strangest thing, man. But, this is what he needs to do. He needs to put a lot of people down, apparently, to make himself feel better about himself, I guess. It's unfortunate. It's sad.
Sure.
But it's long gone, and I don't.
Well, he and like you say, he and Trump belong together. So we'll see where that ends up. But now you signed Boston, but didn't produce them.
Right. There, Paula Hearn was their manager. I'm just sitting in my office one day, and Lenny Pizzi comes down with Paula Hearn. He knew him from Boston, and he knew him from the town Boston. And he said, "Tom, I really need you to hear something and tell me what you think." So we went next door to my boss's office. He was out of town. We played the demo, and I just I literally stopped the tape. I think on the third song. And I said, "Is this candid camera?" Because he was still shopping the song after a whole day. He got to us around 4:00, and we were his last stop. Everyone had passed on Boston. Everyone he played it for that day had passed on it, and it was I literally could not believe that.
Right.
You listen to it, More Than a Feeling was the first song.
Yeah.
It was just stupendous.
A guitar army.
Oh, it was just unbelievable, and it was very close to the finished product. I just couldn't believe it, and I said, if Lenny and I can go hear this band, and they're even close to what I'm hearing on this tape, I promise you, we'll give you a really good record deal. And that was it. We did go it was in Thanksgiving vacation, I think. And we both went back to Boston because we were both from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Aerosmith's rehearsal facility out in Waltham, I think. And Boston was, they played, and there they were, bang. So we signed them.
Amazing. Tell us a little bit about Poison before we wrap up. I saw the band early on in the club. I've been involved in promotion media forever, and I immediately saw these guys had female appeal. They hadn't made their first record. CeCe had just joined the band, and I even reached out and talked about the possibility of signing them. And Rob Toro, their attorney, said, "Man, we just started talking to this little label, Enigma, and we got this little $30,000 deal on the table, and we already started negotiating it. So I think it's a little too late for that." But little did we know when the first album came out, Look What the Cat Dragged In, it sat there. It sat there for almost a year until the video for Talk Dirty to Me hit MTV, which I never thought was their strongest song, and they're on the map. So talk about you stepping in for Open Up and Say obviously, again, a landmark album. Every rose has a thorn, nothing but a good time.
Yeah, well, Rick Browdy had done the first album, and I knew him from. He used to be the kind of the gopher for Lou Futterman, who was the
Ted Nugent.
The Ted Nugent guy. Yeah. So I knew him from our sessions in 1975, and so here it was in 1989, I think, or 87 or 89. Anyway, so he had done that record, and they had some success, and then Capitol, Tom Wally wanted, he called me in and he said, I'd really like it if you would do this record. So we arranged a meeting, a lunch meeting, and I was sitting next to CeCe, and in one of the funnier comments I've ever heard, he turned to me and he said, he always called me Mr. Werman in jest. And he said, "So, Mr. Werman, I hear you do drugs." I said, "Well, occasionally I'll do party favors, and I said, but work comes first." And I just thought it was ironic coming from him. anyway, it went well, that lunch meeting, and everything proceeded, and we had a very good time. A very good time making that record. It was a hard record to make, but for a few different reasons. But I remember when Brett played, every rose in the rehearsal room. He played it on my guitar, and I said, "Boy, that's a strong song." I heard it as a country song, but I said, I'd like to record that, and I'd like you to play the main guitar. And Cece can play some lead guitar, but I want you to play my acoustic guitar in the studio, just like that. And then I again used the kitchen sink approach, but even more excessively this time. And I mean, there were oohs and ahs on that record that Poison never did on any other song, and there were strings and all sorts of stuff. And they, I remember at one point they said, our fans will kill us if or maybe that wasn't them. No, I think somebody else said that. But we did get 4 top 10 singles out of that album.
Yeah,
it was pretty amazing.
Well, they obviously found their mark and hit it out of the park. With that,
yeah.
and again, they had all their distractors. Everybody looked at all the garb and the makeup, and were quickly to denounce them as musicians. Yeah. But again, they gave the people what they wanted. MTV ate it up, and Middle America wanted the kings of the party to come to their town.
Yeah. 5 million copies we sold.
Wow.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I don't know how many by now, but back then, I guess in about 6 months, 7 months.
Yeah. Now I know the record plant was your main home, but you did some work over at the renowned Sound City that's no more. Did you see the documentary, and what was so special about Sound City?
Well, it was. I went there only because my engineer Gary Ladinsky wanted. He booked it for I think it was In Color, or maybe it was Heaven Tonight. One of those 2 albums. We did the tracks there. Then we brought it back to the record plant to overdub and mix. But I went there because he wanted to go there. It was, it was, to me, with limited studio experience at that point, it was nothing special. I liked it. It was fine. We did some interesting miking there. And it was a juicy board, so... Could you leave that light on? Sorry.
Did you see the documentary that Dave Grohl made?
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
Well, I thought it was... his whole... Yeah, I love Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
I've gone on record.
Sure.
He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. Completely.
He's maintained that childhood love for music, and even though he came through punk rock and grunge, he's not afraid to endorse a Rick Springfield or a Stevie Nicks or a Cheap Trick. When a lot of people thought Nirvana was godlike. He's down to earth.
The way they were.
Yeah.
But he's really beyond talented. He's just silly. I mean, he's silly in a good way.
Oh, sure. I saw their recent
great sense of humor and an intense love for rock and roll.
Yeah, I was just at their big show. They did the Love Ride, the final Love Ride, which is the big motorcycle charity out here. And every other song was a classic rock song. They did Under Pressure. They did Tie Your Mother Down. Every other song was somebody else's song, and he just had such a good time. It was you felt like you were at this giant backyard barbecue party, and their songs are obviously some of the best of our era, but you can just tell they worship those classic rock songs they grew up with, and Dave calls them the Battle of the Band songs, and he just has such a good time.
Well, I have one of their 2 discs in the In Your Honor album that I I think is the best music I've heard in 20 years.
Yeah.
There are two discs, one kind of soft, one very hard.
Sure.
And the hard one is just superb, I listen to it regularly.
Right. Well, your albums that we talked about live up. They stand up. We're still listening to them 20, 30, going on 40 years later. And now your son's out there, the next generation at Interscope and A&R. I know it's a completely different world out there, and the business is completely evolved from what you knew it. But what advice do you have to young bands, young singers, young artists today? What do they really need to focus on to, make some timeless hits?
It's really hard for me to give anybody advice today.
But just from a songwriting kind of arrangement, advice.
A good song is the most important thing. You can butcher it in the studio and it'll still shine through. It's just without having a good song, then you're struggling in a number of ways. If you have a good song, you can do almost anything if the song's good enough. So that's the number one thing.
So really work on your songwriting craft. Don't be afraid to collaborate with others to find that magic.
I think so.
Whatever it takes, because I know there's not a formula. We don't want a formula song. We want a song. You look at Adele's success here in the last week. You look at a Taylor Swift or whoever. Or a Foo Fighters. They're writing from the heart. It's not.
Right.
Maybe they got a million songs they love in their head, but it's coming straight from the heart.
So there's the advice. You gave it.
Well, Tom, it's been a supreme pleasure. Thank you so much for the decades of hits.
Oh, you're welcome.
Can't wait to share this with everyone, and best of luck to your son out there bringing up the next generation of hits. And
his name is Daniel.
Daniel Werman, and
and
all of those out on the East Coast, please give them your website for your beautiful bread and breakfast. I know anyone would be, enjoying that.
Yeah, it's Stonover Farm, STONOVERFARM.com.
Well, nothing like great music, great people, and great nature. So, Tom, thanks again so much. We look forward to shaking your hand soon.
Thank you.
Appreciate.
All right, bye-bye.
Take care.